The evening sun was setting over the quiet neighborhood as Detective James Robinson pulled his car into the parking lot of a small convenience store. He had just spent the last 3 hours at his mother's house, helping her fix a leaky faucet and catching up on family matters. Now all he wanted was to grab a cold drink and head home to his own family. James was wearing simple clothes that day, a dark blue hoodie, comfortable jeans, and his favorite sneakers. Nothing fancy. He wasn't on duty, so there was no uniform, no badge visible on his chest, no gun belt around his waist. Just a regular guy stopping for a bottle of water on his way home. The store was one of those typical corner shops you see in every neighborhood. Bright fluorescent lights, aisles packed with snacks and drinks, and a tired-looking clerk behind the counter. James walked in, nodded politely at the clerk, and headed straight for the refrigerated section at the back. He grabbed a large bottle of water, checked the price, and made his way to the counter. The clerk, an older man with gray hair and kind eyes, rang up the purchase. They exchanged a few words about the weather. Nothing important, just the kind of small talk that makes life feel normal. James paid with cash, took his receipt, and tucked it into his pocket. The whole thing took maybe 2 minutes. As he pushed open the glass door and stepped back into the parking lot, James noticed something that made his stomach tighten just a bit. A police cruiser was pulling into the lot, moving slowly, deliberately. The car came to a stop near the entrance, and 2 officers stepped out. James had been a cop for 15 years. He knew that look, that body language, that careful way they scanned the area. They were looking for someone. And right now their eyes were locked on him. He told himself to stay calm. He had done nothing wrong. He was a decorated detective with the state police, for crying out loud. He had commendations, awards, letters of appreciation from the community. But none of that mattered right now because none of that was visible. All they saw was a black man in a hoodie walking through a parking lot at dusk. James continued walking toward his car, trying to act natural. He could feel their eyes following him. The bottle of water felt heavy in his hand, though it weighed almost nothing. Every step seemed to echo in the quiet evening air. Then he heard it. That voice every person of color knows too well. "Hey, you there! Stop right where you are!" James stopped. His heart was beating faster now, but he kept his face calm. He had been trained for high-pressure situations. He had talked down armed suspects, negotiated with dangerous criminals, handled riots and protests. But this was different. This was him on the other side. He turned slowly, making sure his hands were visible. The 2 officers were walking toward him now, and he could see their hands hovering near their weapons. The taller one, who looked to be in his early 30s, had his right hand resting on his gun holster. The other one, slightly shorter and stockier, was moving to circle around behind James. "Can I help you, officers?" James asked, keeping his voice steady and respectful. This was not the time for pride or attitude. This was survival. The tall officer spoke first. His name tag read Daniels. "We got a call about a robbery suspect in this area. Black male, wearing dark clothing, about your height and build. You match that description." James felt a familiar frustration rising in his chest, but he pushed it down. How many times had he heard this? How many black men in this city were about his height, wearing dark clothing? Probably thousands. But he knew how this worked. He knew the script. "Officer, I understand, but I just came from visiting my mother. I stopped here to buy water. I have the receipt right here in my pocket. The clerk inside can confirm I was just shopping. The officer called Daniels didn't seem interested. I need you to put your hands where I can see them." "Right now." James slowly raised both hands, the water bottle still in his right hand. "My wallet is in my back pocket. I can show you my identification if you'd like." The second officer, whose tag read McCarthy, had completed his circle and was now standing behind James. "Don't move," he barked. "Keep your hands up." A woman walking to her car stopped and stared. Then another person came out of the store and paused, sensing the tension. Within seconds, a small crowd was beginning to gather. James could see phones coming out, cameras pointing in his direction. At least there would be witnesses. At least there would be video. "Officer Daniels," James said, keeping his voice calm and clear. "I'm going to tell you something important, and I need you to listen carefully. I am a police officer. I'm a detective with the state police. My badge and identification are in my wallet. If you just let me show you—" "Sure you are," Daniels interrupted with a smirk. "And I'm the police commissioner. You think we're stupid?" McCarthy laughed from behind him. "Yeah, we hear that one all the time. Everyone's a cop when they get caught. James felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his composure.
I'm not lying to you.
I'm asking you, as a fellow officer, to check my credentials before this situation gets out of hand. My name is Detective James Robinson. You can call it in right now and verify. But they weren't listening. Daniel stepped closer, his face hard and suspicious. Turn around. Put your hands on the car, now. This was really happening. After 15 years of service, after all the criminals he had caught, all the lives he had saved, all the hours spent protecting and serving this very community, he was being treated like a suspect. Like a criminal. Like his badge, his rank, his entire career meant nothing because of the color of his skin. James took a slow breath. He could fight this. He could argue, demand they verify his identity, insist on his rights. But he had seen how these situations could spiral out of control. He had seen the news stories, watched the videos, attended the funerals. He knew that one wrong move, one misinterpreted gesture could end with him on the ground, or worse, so he complied. He turned around, placed his hands on the hood of his car, and felt the cold metal against his palms. The water bottle rolled away across the parking lot. The crowd was growing larger now, more phones recording, more voices murmuring in confusion and concern. And all James could think was, I'm a cop. I'm one of them. And they don't even care. James could feel his heart pounding against his chest as he stood there with his hands pressed against the hood of his car. The metal was warm from sitting in the sun all day, but his hands felt cold. Everything felt cold. Officer Daniels was now right behind him, so close James could hear his breathing. Spread your legs wider. James complied, spreading his feet apart. He had done this same thing to dozens, maybe hundreds of suspects over his career. But being on this side of it felt completely different. It felt humiliating. Dehumanizing. I'm telling you again, James said, his voice still calm but firmer now. I'm a detective. My badge is in my wallet, right back pocket. Just look at it. That's all I'm asking. Shut up. McCarthy snapped from somewhere to his left. We'll decide what we look at and when. James heard the metallic click of handcuffs being removed from Daniel's belt. His stomach dropped. This was really happening. They were actually going to arrest him. Wait, James said, an edge of urgency creeping into his voice now. Just listen to me for 1 second. Call your dispatcher. Give them my name. James Robinson, badge number 4723. State Police Detective Division. Just call it in. That's all you have to do. Daniels grabbed James's right wrist and yanked it behind his back roughly. The movement was aggressive, more forceful than necessary. James winced but didn't resist. Resisting would only make things worse. Resisting could get him killed. You got any weapons on you? Daniels asked. No, James replied. I'm off duty. No weapon. We'll see about that. The second cuff snapped around his left wrist. The metal bit into his skin tighter than it needed to be. James had been trained to apply handcuffs firmly but not painfully. This was painful. This was meant to hurt. By now, at least a dozen people had gathered in the parking lot. A young woman with her phone held high was standing near the store entrance recording everything. An older couple stood by their car, watching with concerned faces. A teenager on a bicycle had stopped on the sidewalk, unable to look away from the scene unfolding. This ain't right, someone in the crowd called out. That man said he's a cop. Why don't you check his ID? Step back, McCarthy shouted at the crowd. This is official police business. Everyone stay back or you'll be arrested for interference. The crowd didn't move back, but they didn't move forward either. They just stood there watching, recording, bearing witness to something that shouldn't be happening but was happening anyway. Daniels began patting James down, his hands moving roughly over James's body. He checked his pockets, his waistband, his ankles. When he reached the back pocket where James's wallet was, he pulled it out. James felt a surge of relief. Finally. They would open the wallet, see the badge, see the ID, and this nightmare would be over. They would apologize, uncuff him, and he could go home to his family. But Daniels didn't open the wallet. He just held it in his hand, looking at it, then looked at McCarthy. Check it, James said. Please, just open it and look inside. Daniels shoved the wallet into his own pocket. We'll look at it at the station. After we process you properly. James couldn't believe what he was hearing. You have my wallet right there in your hand. My badge is inside. Just look at it. What are you afraid of? I said we'll look at it at the station. Daniels repeated, his voice hard. McCarthy moved toward James's car. I'm going to search the vehicle. You consent to a search? No, I don't consent, James said firmly. You have no probable cause to search my car. I haven't committed any crime. I'm a police officer who stopped to buy a bottle of water. McCarthy laughed. You hear that? He's giving us a law lesson. I think we got ourselves a jailhouse lawyer here. You need a warrant or probable cause to search that vehicle, James said, his professional training kicking in despite the situation. You know that. You're violating my Fourth Amendment rights. We got plenty of probable cause, Daniel said. You match the description of a robbery suspect. That gives us the right to search. What robbery? James asked. Where did it happen? When? What was stolen? Give me the details of this supposed robbery. Daniels didn't answer. He just grabbed James by the arm and started walking him toward the police cruiser. The store clerk suddenly came running out of the shop, waving his hands. Officers! Officers, wait! That man didn't do anything wrong. He just bought water from me. I can show you the transaction on the register. He's telling the truth. Daniels didn't even look at the clerk. Sir, return to your store. This doesn't concern you, but he's innocent. The clerk protested. I saw him. He was just shopping. He didn't rob anybody. Last warning, McCarthy said, turning toward the clerk with his hand on his belt. Go back inside or I'll arrest you for obstruction. The clerk stood there for a moment, clearly wanting to help, but also clearly afraid. Finally, he backed away, shaking his head in frustration and disbelief. James felt completely powerless. Here he was, a 15-year veteran of law enforcement being arrested in front of a crowd of witnesses, despite having done absolutely nothing wrong. His badge was literally in Daniel's pocket, and the man refused to look at it. As they reached the police cruiser, Daniels opened the back door. The inside smelled like sweat and fear. Like all the other suspects who had sat in this same spot, James had put people in the back of police cars hundreds of times. He never imagined he would be one of them. Watch your head, Daniels said, though he didn't actually help James avoid hitting his head on the doorframe. James had to duck awkwardly with his hands cuffed behind his back. Before he was pushed inside, James turned and looked directly at Daniels. He made sure his voice was loud enough for everyone to hear, especially the people recording on their phones. Officer Daniels, I am telling you one last time. I am Detective James Robinson of the State Police. My badge is in my wallet, which you took from me and put in your pocket. All you have to do is look at it. Just open the wallet and look. This is your last chance to do the right thing before the situation becomes something neither of us wants. For just a second, James saw something flicker in Daniels' eyes. Doubt, maybe. Or uncertainty. But then it was gone, replaced by stubborn pride. Get in the car, Daniels said, and pushed James into the back seat. The door slammed shut with a heavy final sound. Through the window, James could see the crowd, still watching, still recording. He could see the store clerk standing by the entrance, his face sad and helpless. He could see his own car parked innocently in the lot, the water bottle he had bought lying on the ground nearby, and he could see Daniels and McCarthy standing by their cruiser, talking to each other, probably deciding what charges to make up. James leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes. He thought about his wife, who would be expecting him home soon. He thought about his 2 kids, probably doing homework or watching TV. He thought about his mother, who had hugged him goodbye just an hour ago. And he thought about all the other times this had happened to him. Being followed in stores, being pulled over for traffic violations that weren't violations, being questioned in his own neighborhood, being treated like a suspect instead of a citizen. But this time was different. This time he had a badge. This time he was one of them, and they still didn't care. The drive to the police station felt like the longest 15 minutes of James's life. He sat in the back of the cruiser, handcuffs digging into his wrists, watching the familiar streets pass by through the window. These were streets he had patrolled himself, streets where he had helped people, stopped crimes, made the community safer. Up front, Daniels was driving while McCarthy talked on the radio, reporting the arrest. James could hear bits and pieces of the conversation. Yeah, we got a suspect matching the description. Dark clothing, approximately 6 feet. Bringing him in now for processing. No mention that the suspect claimed to be a police officer. No mention that they had his wallet and refused to check it. No mention that a witness had vouched for him. Just the standard arrest report. as if this was routine, as if everything was normal. James wanted to speak up, to say something, but he knew it wouldn't help. He had seen suspects talk themselves into worse situations plenty of times. Right now, the best thing he could do was stay quiet and wait until they got to the station. Surely someone there would recognize him. Surely this would all get sorted out once they arrived. The station came into view, a 3-story brick building with the city seal mounted above the main entrance. James had been inside buildings like this one countless times, working cases, filing reports, grabbing coffee with fellow officers. But he had never entered one like this. Not in handcuffs, not as a suspect. Daniels pulled into the garage and parked near the entrance. McCarthy got out first and opened James's door. "Let's go. Watch your step." James awkwardly climbed out of the back seat, his hands still cuffed behind him. Every movement was clumsy and undignified. He had to twist his body just to get his legs out of the car, and standing up without the use of his hands made him feel off balance. They walked him through a side entrance and down a hallway that smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Other officers passed by, barely glancing at them. This was routine for them. Just another arrest on just another evening. They brought him to the booking desk where a female sergeant sat behind a computer. Her nameplate read Reyes. She looked up as they approached, her expression neutral and professional. "What do we have?" she asked Daniels. "Possible robbery suspect," Daniels said. "Matched the description from the call we got earlier. Found him leaving a convenience store on Maple Street." Sergeant Reyes looked at James, taking in his appearance. Then she looked back at Daniels. "Did you run his ID?" "We'll get to that," Daniels said quickly. "Just process him." Reyes frowned slightly but turned to her computer. "Name?" Before Daniels could answer, James spoke up. "My name is Detective James Robinson, badge number 4723, State Police, and I'd appreciate it if someone would check my credentials before this goes any further." Reyes's fingers paused over her keyboard. She looked at James more carefully now, studying his face, his posture, the way he spoke. Then she looked at Daniels and McCarthy. "He says he's a detective," she said. It wasn't quite a question, but it wasn't quite a statement either. "Yeah, he's been saying that," McCarthy said with a smirk. "Creative, right?" "Did you check?" Reyes asked. "We're bringing you his personal effects now," Daniels said, pulling James's wallet from his pocket and placing it on the desk. "You can inventory everything." Reyes picked up the wallet. It was a simple black leather wallet, worn from years of use. She opened it. James watched her face closely. He saw her eyes widen slightly, saw her mouth open just a bit, saw all the color drain from her cheeks. She pulled out the badge first, a gold shield polished and official, with the state police emblem clearly visible. Then she pulled out the ID card. James's photo, his name, his rank. All of it right there, impossible to deny. Reyes looked up at Daniels and McCarthy. Her voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it that hadn't been there before. "Do you two know who this is?" "Some guy claiming to be a cop," Daniels said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. He had seen Reyes's face. He knew something was wrong. "This is a cop," Reyes said, holding up the badge. "This is Detective James Robinson, State Police, and he's standing here in handcuffs in our station." The room went completely silent. James could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, the distant sound of phones ringing somewhere down the hall, the pounding of his own heartbeat. McCarthy's face went pale. Daniels just stood there, staring at the badge in Reyes's hand like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. That can't be right," Daniels stammered. He matched the description. "The call said—" "I don't care what the call said," Reyes interrupted. "You just arrested a detective. A state police detective. And from what I'm hearing, he told you who he was and you didn't bother to check." She set the badge down and immediately started working on James's handcuffs. Her hands were shaking slightly as she unlocked them. "I am so sorry, Detective. This is completely unacceptable." The handcuffs came off and James rubbed his wrists where the metal had dug into his skin. There were red marks there, probably bruises forming already. "Thank you, Sergeant," James said quietly. Reyes was already picking up her phone. "I need to call the watch commander. He needs to know about this immediately." "Wait," Daniels said, stepping forward. "Listen, this was just a misunderstanding. We were responding to a call. We had a description. He matched it. We were just doing our jobs." James turned to look at him. Really look at him. He saw a man who was scared now, realizing he had made a terrible mistake. But James also saw something else. He saw a man who had been so quick to assume, so ready to believe the worst. so unwilling to listen. "Tell me something, Officer Daniels," James said, his voice calm but firm. "If I had been a white man in a hoodie, would you have arrested me? Or would you have checked my ID when I asked you to?" Daniels opened his mouth, then closed it again. He had no answer. They both knew the answer. "And when I told you I was a police officer," James continued, "when I gave you my name and badge number, when I asked you multiple times to check my wallet, why didn't you? Why were you so sure I was lying?" Still no answer. McCarthy was staring at his shoes, unable to meet James's eyes. The door to the booking area opened, and a tall man in a lieutenant's uniform strode in. His face was already red with anger, and he hadn't even heard the full story yet. "Somebody better tell me what the hell is going on here," the lieutenant barked. Then he saw James, and his expression changed from anger to shock. "Detective Robinson? What are you doing here?" James recognized him immediately. Lieutenant Graves. They had worked together on a major drug trafficking case about 2 years ago. Had spent weeks coordinating surveillance, planning raids, building the case. They had celebrated together when they finally made the arrests. "Hello, Lieutenant," James said. "I'm here because these 2 officers arrested me for buying a bottle of water." Graves's face went from shock to fury in about half a second. He turned to Daniels and McCarthy, and James could practically see steam coming out of his ears. "You 2 arrested Detective Robinson. Are you out of your minds?" "Sir, we had a call about a robbery suspect," Daniels tried to explain. He matched the description. "We were just—" "Did he tell you he was a police officer?" Graves demanded. Daniels hesitated. "Yes, but did he ask you to check his credentials?" "Yes, but we thought—" "Did you check them?" "Silence, answer me," Graves shouted. "Did you check his credentials when he asked you to?" "No, sir," Daniels finally admitted. Graves looked like he wanted to punch something. Instead, he took a deep breath and turned to James. "Detective, I cannot apologize enough for this. This is completely unacceptable and it will be addressed. Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" James shook his head. "I'm fine, sir. Just ready to go home, of course. Sergeant Reyes, please return all of Detective Robinson's property immediately." Graves turned back to Daniels and McCarthy. "You 2 in my office now." But James held up a hand. "Actually, Lieutenant, before I go, I have one question I'd like these officers to answer." Everyone looked at him. James looked directly at Daniels and McCarthy. "I want to know if you would have checked my wallet if I'd been white. I want an honest answer. Would you have treated me the same way if I had white skin?" The question hung in the air like smoke. No one spoke. No one moved. Because everyone in that room knew the answer, even if no one wanted to say it out loud. Finally, James picked up his wallet and badge from the desk. "That's what I thought," he said quietly. "This isn't about apologies anymore. This is about something much bigger than that." James drove home in silence that night. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, and he kept checking his rearview mirror every few seconds, a habit he had developed over years of police work. But tonight it felt different. Tonight he wasn't watching for criminals. He was watching for police cruisers. When he finally pulled into his driveway, he sat in the car for a long moment before going inside. The lights were on in the living room, warm and welcoming. He could see shadows moving behind the curtains. His family waiting for him. They had no idea what had happened. He took a deep breath and got out of the car. His wife, Patricia, met him at the door. One look at his face told her something was wrong. After 20 years of marriage, she could read him like a book. "What happened?" she asked immediately, her hand touching his arm. James tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Long day." "I'm okay." "Don't give me that," Patricia said, closing the door behind him. "I know that look. Something happened. Tell me." Their teenage daughter, Ashley, appeared in the hallway. She was 16, smart, and way too observant for her own good.
"Dad, you okay?"
"I'm fine, sweetheart," James said, but his voice cracked slightly on the last word. Patricia took his hand and led him to the kitchen table, the same table where they had shared thousands of meals, helped the kids with homework, planned vacations, and discussed everything from bills to dreams. She sat him down and took the chair across from him. "Talk to me," she said gently, so James told her. He told her about stopping at the store, about the officers approaching him, about being handcuffed and arrested despite telling them repeatedly who he was. He told her about standing in the booking area, being treated like a criminal, watching Sergeant Reyes pull his badge from his wallet. Patricia's hand covered her mouth as she listened. Tears formed in her eyes, but she didn't interrupt. She just let him talk, let him get it all out. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, 15 years. You've been a police officer for 15 years. You've got medals, commendations, letters of thanks, and they still did this to you. Yeah, James said softly. They did. Ashley had been standing in the doorway listening to the whole thing. Now she came into the kitchen, her young face struggling to process what she had heard. But Dad, you're a cop. You're one of them. How could they do this to you? James looked at his daughter. This beautiful, intelligent young woman who still believed the world was fair, who still thought that being good and following the rules meant you would be treated right. He wished he could protect that innocence a little longer. Baby, sometimes the badge doesn't matter, he said. Sometimes all people see is the color of your skin. That's not fair, Ashley said, and her voice was angry now. That's not right. No, it's not, James agreed. But it's reality. Patricia stood up and wrapped her arms around him. He felt himself relax into her embrace, letting go of some of the tension he had been carrying. In her arms, he was safe. In this house with his family, he didn't have to be Detective Robinson. He could just be James. He could be hurt, be angry, be vulnerable. They stayed like that for a while, just holding each other while Ashley sat at the table, processing everything she had learned about the world that evening. Finally, Patricia pulled back and looked him in the eyes. What are you going to do about this? I don't know, James admitted. Lieutenant Graves said it would be addressed. Daniels and McCarthy will probably get a slap on the wrist, maybe a suspension. Then everything goes back to normal. Is that enough for you? Patricia asked. James thought about it. Was it enough? He could file a complaint, go through the official channels, let the department handle it internally. That's what he was supposed to do. That's what a good officer would do. Don't make waves. Don't cause trouble. Trust the system. But what if the system was broken? No, he said finally. It's not enough. The next morning, James woke up early. He hadn't slept well. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Daniel's hand moving toward his gun, felt the cold metal of the handcuffs on his wrists, heard McCarthy's mocking laugh. He got up, showered, and put on his suit. Then he sat down at his computer and began to type. He wrote down everything that had happened, every detail he could remember, from the moment he left his mother's house to the moment Lieutenant Graves released him. He included the names of witnesses, the store clerk who had tried to vouch for him, the approximate number of people who had recorded the incident on their phones. When he finished, he had a detailed professional report of the entire incident. Then he saved it and sent copies to 3 different email addresses. One to his personal account, one to Internal Affairs, and one to a lawyer friend who specialized in civil rights cases. He wasn't sure what would come of it, but at least it was documented. At least the truth was on record. His phone rang. It was Lieutenant Graves. Robinson, how are you doing this morning? Graves asked, his voice concerned. I've been better, sir, James replied honestly. I can imagine. Listen, I wanted to let you know that we've opened a full investigation into last night's incident. Daniels and McCarthy have been placed on administrative leave pending the results. I've also requested all available video footage from the scene. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. There's something else, Graves said, and his tone changed slightly. The media got wind of this. One of the bystanders posted their video online last night, and it's going viral. We're already getting calls from news stations wanting comments. The chief wants to meet with you this afternoon. James's stomach sank. He had known this might happen, but he had hoped to have more time before dealing with media attention. Understood, sir. What time? 2 o'clock. And James? Be prepared. This is going to get big. Graves was right. By noon, the video had been shared thousands of times on social media. James's phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications. Text messages from friends and fellow officers, some supportive, some asking what really happened, some suggesting he should have just shown his badge sooner. That last group made him angry, as if this was somehow his fault, as if he hadn't tried to show his badge, as if he hadn't told them exactly who he was. The video was clear. The sound quality was good enough that you could hear James calmly identifying himself as a police officer. You could hear him asking them to check his wallet. You could hear Daniels refuse. You could see James being handcuffed, treated roughly, humiliated in front of a crowd. The comments section was a war zone. Some people expressed outrage at the officers' behavior. Others defended Daniels and McCarthy, saying they were just doing their jobs. And some predictably said James must have done something to deserve it, that the video didn't show the whole story. Patricia came into his home office, where he sat staring at his computer screen, reading comment after comment. "You need to stop looking at that," she said gently. "It's just going to upset you more." "They're saying I brought this on myself," James said. "They're saying I must have been acting suspicious, that I should have cooperated better." "You know that's not true," Patricia said firmly. "You were buying water. You did cooperate. You told them exactly who you were and they didn't listen. None of this is your fault." James knew she was right, but it didn't make it easier to read. He closed his laptop and stood up. "I need to get to the station. Meeting with the chief in an hour." The police station felt different when James walked in that afternoon. People stared at him. Some nodded in support. Others looked away, uncomfortable. The whispers followed him down the hallway. "That's him. Can you believe what happened? I heard he's making a big deal out of nothing." Chief Anderson's office was on the 3rd floor, a large room with windows overlooking the city. The chief was a stern man in his late 50s with gray hair and a reputation for running a tight ship. He stood when James entered and extended his hand. "Detective Robinson, thank you for coming." They shook hands and the chief gestured to a chair. James sat down, his back straight, his face professional. He knew how to handle brass. He had done it plenty of times before. "I've watched the video," Chief Anderson said without preamble. "I've read the reports. I've spoken with Lieutenant Graves, Sergeant Reyes, and the 2 officers involved. I want you to know that what happened to you is completely unacceptable, and it does not represent the values of this department." "Thank you, sir," James said. "I also want you to know that we're taking this very seriously. The investigation is ongoing and appropriate disciplinary action will be taken." James nodded. "I appreciate that, sir, but I have to be honest with you. I'm not sure disciplinary action is enough." Chief Anderson leaned back in his chair. "What do you mean?" "Sir, this isn't just about 2 officers making a mistake," James said carefully. "This is about a pattern, a culture. How many other people have been treated the way I was? How many people who didn't have a badge to prove their worth? How many incidents like this happen every day that we never hear about?" The chief was quiet for a moment, studying James's face. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we need real change," James said. "Not just punishment for 2 officers. We need to look at our training, our hiring practices, our response to complaints. We need to ask ourselves why this keeps happening." 3 days after the incident, James sat in a television studio, bright lights shining in his face, waiting for the interview to begin. He had never been comfortable in front of cameras, but his lawyer friend, David Chen, had convinced him that telling his story publicly was the only way to force real change. "People need to hear this from you," David had said. "Not from the department's public relations team, not from politicians trying to score points. From you, a decorated officer who was treated like a criminal because of the color of his skin." So here James was, wearing his dress uniform, his medals and commendations on full display, sitting across from a local news anchor named Rachel Kim. She had a reputation for asking tough questions but being fair, which is why James had agreed to this particular interview. "We're live in 30 seconds, a producer said. Adjusting James's microphone one last time, James took a deep breath. Patricia was in the green room watching on a monitor. She had wanted to be here to support him. Ashley was at home, probably watching with friends, proud of her dad for speaking out. "And we're live," the producer announced. Rachel Kim turned to the camera with a professional smile. "Good evening. I'm Rachel Kim, and tonight we have an exclusive interview with Detective James Robinson, the state police officer who was wrongfully arrested 3 days ago while off duty. The incident, captured on video and viewed millions of times online, has sparked a national conversation about racial profiling and police accountability. Detective Robinson, thank you for being here." "Thank you for having me," James said. "Let's start at the beginning," Rachel said. "Can you walk us through what happened that evening?" James told the story again, just as he had told it to his wife, to the chief, to Internal Affairs. But this time he told it to the world. He described stopping for water, being approached by the officers, being handcuffed despite identifying himself repeatedly. Rachel listened carefully, then asked, "You told the officers multiple times that you were a detective. You gave them your name and badge number. Why do you think they didn't believe you? James had known this question was coming, but it was still hard to answer honestly. I think they had already made up their minds about who I was based on how I looked. When they saw a black man in a hoodie, they saw a suspect. They couldn't see past that even when I told them the truth. Do you believe this was racial profiling? Yes, I do, James said firmly. If I had been white, I don't believe I would have been arrested. I don't believe they would have ignored my request to check my credentials. I don't believe I would have been treated with such disrespect. Rachel leaned forward. You've been a police officer for 15 years. You've worked the streets, made arrests, put your life on the line. How does it feel to be on the other side of that? James paused, choosing his words carefully. It's devastating. I've dedicated my life to serving this community, to protecting people, to being one of the good guys. And in that moment, none of it mattered. My badge didn't matter. My service didn't matter. All that mattered was the color of my skin. What do you want to happen now? Rachel asked. I want accountability, James said. Not just for the officers who arrested me, but for the system that allowed this to happen. We need better training. We need to take complaints of racial profiling seriously. We need to create a culture where officers feel comfortable speaking up when they see their colleagues doing wrong. Some people are saying you're being divisive, that you're attacking police officers, Rachel said, reading from a card. How do you respond to that? James looked directly into the camera. I'm a police officer. I'm not attacking law enforcement. I'm trying to make it better. I'm trying to save lives. Because if this could happen to me, imagine what happens to people who don't have a badge. Imagine how many incidents like this happen every single day to people who don't have the platform I have to speak out. The interview continued for another 20 minutes. Rachel asked about the department's response, about the ongoing investigation, about James's plans for the future. James answered every question honestly, professionally, even when the answers were uncomfortable. When it was over, the producer gave them the all-clear signal. Rachel stood and shook James's hand. That was powerful, she said. Thank you for your honesty. James left the studio feeling drained. Patricia met him in the hallway and hugged him tight. You did great, she whispered. I'm so proud of you. They drove home in comfortable silence, listening to the radio. Then James's phone started ringing. It was David, his lawyer friend. You need to see this, David said as soon as James answered. See what? The response to your interview. It's everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, every news website. People are organizing protests. They're demanding reform. James, you've started something big. That night, James couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, scrolling through social media on his phone, watching the wave of reactions to his interview. The hashtag #CheckTheBadge was trending. People were sharing their own stories of encounters with police, stories that eerily mirrored his own experience. But there was also pushback. Some police unions were criticizing him for speaking out publicly. Some fellow officers were calling him a traitor. Online comments accused him of exaggerating, of playing the victim, of trying to get attention. It hurt more than he expected. These were his people, his brothers and sisters in blue, and some of them were turning on him for telling the truth. Patricia stirred next to him. You should try to sleep, she murmured. I can't, James admitted. I keep thinking about all the people reaching out, all the stories they're sharing. How long has this been going on? How many people have been hurt? Probably forever, Patricia said softly. But you're doing something about it. That matters. The next morning, James woke to find protesters gathering outside the police headquarters. Dozens of people, then hundreds, holding signs that read, Black cops matter too, and check the badge, and no justice, no peace. His phone rang again. This time it was Chief Anderson. Detective, we have a situation, the chief said, his voice tight. There are protesters outside the station. They're demanding to speak with you. They want you to address them. Me? James was surprised. Why me? Because you're the face of this movement now, whether you intended to be or not. Will you speak to them? James thought about it. He could stay home, stay quiet, let this blow over, or he could step up, use his voice, try to make something good come from this nightmare. I'll be there in an hour, he said. When James arrived at the station, the crowd had grown even larger. News vans lined the street, cameras pointed at the protesters. Police officers in riot gear stood in formation, watching the crowd nervously. Lieutenant Graves met James at the side entrance. You sure about this? No, James admitted. but I'm going to do it anyway. They had set up a microphone on the station steps. As James approached, the crowd erupted in cheers. He saw people of all ages, all races, all walks of life. He saw other police officers in uniform standing with the protesters. He saw mothers with their children, teenagers with homemade signs, elderly couples holding hands. The crowd quieted as James stepped up to the microphone. For a moment, he just looked at them, at all these people who had come out to support him, to demand change. "Thank you for being here," he began, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Thank you for caring. Thank you for believing that we can do better." A cheer went up. James waited for it to die down. 3 days ago, I was arrested for buying a bottle of water while being black. Despite telling the officers who I was, despite asking them to check my credentials, despite doing everything right, I was handcuffed and treated like a criminal. "That should never have happened," the crowd murmured in agreement. "But here's what I want you to know. I'm not the victim here. I'm the lucky one. Because I had a badge, because I had a platform, because I'm still alive to tell this story. How many people don't get that chance?" The crowd fell silent listening. This isn't just about me. This is about every person who has been pulled over for driving while black. Every person who has been followed in stores. Every person who has been treated as suspicious simply for existing in their own skin. Every person who has been denied the dignity and respect they deserve. James paused, looking out at the sea of faces. I became a police officer because I wanted to help people. I wanted to make my community safer. I wanted to be part of the solution. And I still believe in that mission, but I also know now more than ever that we have work to do. We have to be honest about the problems in our system. We have to listen when people tell us about their experiences. We have to be willing to change. Some people say I'm being divisive, that I'm attacking police officers. But that's not true. I'm one of you, he said, gesturing to the officers standing nearby. And I'm asking you to be better. I'm asking us to be better because we can't protect communities if those communities don't trust us. And right now, too many people have good reasons not to trust us. The crowd was completely still now, hanging on every word. So here's what I'm asking. I'm asking for accountability. I'm asking for transparency. I'm asking for real training on implicit bias and de-escalation. I'm asking for an independent review board to investigate complaints. I'm asking for body cameras on every officer. 2 weeks had passed since James's arrest, and the internal affairs investigation was in full swing. James sat in a small conference room at department headquarters, across from 2 IA investigators he had never met before. They had been interviewing everyone involved, collecting evidence, building their case. The lead investigator, a woman named Captain Lisa Warren, slid a folder across the table to James. "We've compiled the preliminary findings," she said. "I thought you should see them before the official report is released." James opened the folder. Inside were copies of the videos taken by bystanders, transcripts of witness statements, records of radio communications from that night. But there was something else, too. Something that made his blood run cold. "What am I looking at?" he asked, holding up a stack of complaint forms. "Those are previous complaints filed against Officers Daniels and McCarthy," Captain Warren explained. "We pulled their complete personnel files as part of the investigation." James began reading through them. Complaint after complaint, stretching back years. Citizens reporting being stopped without cause, searched illegally, treated aggressively. Most of the complainants were Black or Latino. Most of the complaints had been dismissed or labeled as unfounded. 12 complaints against Daniels, James said, his voice tight. 15 against McCarthy, all involving potential racial profiling. And nothing was done? The second investigator, Sergeant Thomas Wu, shook his head. The complaints were investigated by their supervisors. In most cases, the officer's word was taken over the citizens. Without video evidence or independent witnesses, the complaints were difficult to substantiate. Until now, James said. Until now. Captain Warren agreed. Your case is different. We have multiple videos, multiple witnesses, clear documentation that you identified yourself as a police officer and requested they check your credentials. We have the store clerk's testimony. We have Sergeant Reyes's statement about what she observed at booking. This case is solid. James continued reading through the complaints. Each one told a similar story. A traffic stop that seemed unjustified. A search that seemed illegal. An attitude that seemed hostile. And in each case, the citizen's word against the officer's word, with the department choosing to believe their own. This shouldn't have taken my arrest to come to light, James said. These complaints have been there all along. Why wasn't anyone paying attention? Captain Warren and Sergeant Wu exchanged glances. Finally, Warren spoke. That's a fair question, Detective. And it's one that goes beyond just these two officers. It speaks to systemic issues in how we handle complaints, especially complaints alleging racial bias. Over the next hour, they walked James through the rest of their findings. They had discovered that Daniels and McCarthy frequently worked together and had developed a pattern of aggressive policing in predominantly minority neighborhoods. They had high arrest numbers, which their supervisors praised, but many of those arrests resulted in dropped charges or acquittals. We also found something interesting about the robbery call that night, Sergeant Wu said, pulling out another document. The call came in at 6:47 p.m. It was a report of a strong-arm robbery at a gas station approximately 2 miles from where you were stopped. The suspect was described as a black male, approximately 6 feet tall, wearing dark clothing and a baseball cap. I wasn't wearing a cap, James pointed out. We know. But here's the thing. At 6:52 p.m., dispatch put out an update. The suspect had been apprehended by another unit, about half a mile from the gas station. He confessed on scene. James felt his stomach drop. So when Daniels and McCarthy stopped me at 7:05, the suspect was already in custody, Wu confirmed. They should have known that. They should have heard the update on their radio. Did they hear it? James asked. Warren pulled out a radio log. According to dispatch records, the update was broadcast on their channel. Whether they heard it or not, we can't prove, but they should have been aware that the suspect was already caught before they ever approached you. James leaned back in his chair, processing this information. They had arrested him even though the actual suspect was already in custody. They had ignored his identification, refused to check his credentials, and treated him like a criminal when there was no longer even a suspect to look for. So what happens now? James asked. The investigation will conclude in the next week, Captain Warren said. Based on our findings, we'll be recommending termination for both Daniels and McCarthy. We're also recommending that the department review all previous complaints against them to see if any warrant reopening. And the department will agree to this? James asked. He had seen plenty of investigations where the recommendations got watered down by the time they reached the chief's desk. That's not up to us, Warren admitted. But I'll tell you this, Detective. The media attention, the protests, the public pressure, it's made this case impossible to sweep under the rug. Whatever happens, it's going to be public, and the department knows that. James left the meeting feeling a mix of satisfaction and frustration. Satisfaction that the investigation was thorough, that the truth was coming to light. Frustration that it had taken his own arrest to expose problems that had been documented for years. He returned to work the next day, his first time back on active duty since the incident. Walking into the detective bureau felt strange. Some colleagues greeted him warmly, expressing support. Others avoided eye contact, uncomfortable with the attention his case had brought to the department. His partner, Detective Kevin Torres, was waiting at their shared desk with 2 cups of coffee. Welcome back, Kevin said, handing him a cup. How you holding up? I've been better, James admitted, sitting down. You? Kevin was quiet for a moment. Honestly, it's been weird around here. Some guys are supportive. Some think you're making too big a deal out of it. Some are worried about what this means for the rest of us. What do you think? James asked. Kevin met his eyes. I think you did the right thing. I think what happened to you was wrong, and I think speaking out took guts. But I also think things are going to be complicated for a while. He was right. Over the next few days, James felt the division within the department. In the locker room, conversations would stop when he entered. In briefings, he caught officers whispering and glancing his way. Some of it was supportive, some of it wasn't. One afternoon, an older officer named Frank Miller approached James in the parking lot. Frank had been on the force for 30 years and had a reputation as old-school traditional. Got a minute? Frank asked. Sure, James said, though he braced himself for criticism. Frank looked around to make sure they were alone. I wanted to tell you something. About 25 years ago, when I was a rookie, I responded to a call with my training officer. We stopped a guy who fit the description of a burglary suspect. Turned out he was a city councilman just out for a jog. Black guy in athletic clothes in his own neighborhood. James listened, saying nothing. My training officer realized his mistake pretty quick and let the man go, but he made me promise never to talk about it. Said it would embarrass the department. So I didn't. I kept quiet. And you know what? I've thought about that moment for 25 years. Wondered how many other times something like that happened. Wondered if I should have spoken up. Frank met James's eyes. What I'm saying is, I'm glad you didn't keep quiet. I'm glad you spoke up, because maybe if more of us had done that over the years, things would be different now. He walked away before James could respond, leaving James standing there in the parking lot, thinking about all the incidents that had been buried, all the voices that had been silenced, all the opportunities for change that had been missed. That evening, James attended a community meeting organized by local activists. They had invited him to speak, to hear directly from residents about their experiences with police. The meeting was held in a church basement, packed with about 100 people. James sat on a panel with several community leaders and listened as person after person came to the microphone to share their stories. Young black man described being stopped and frisked 3 times in 1 month, always released without charges. An elderly woman talked about her grandson being arrested in their own front yard because a neighbor called the police, suspicious of a strange black man in the neighborhood. A Latino father spoke about being pulled over and questioned about his immigration status, even though he was born in this country. Each story was different, but they all shared common themes: fear, humiliation, a sense that they were guilty until proven innocent, a feeling that no matter what they did, they would always be seen as suspects first and citizens second. When it was James's turn to speak, he stood and faced the crowd. I want to thank all of you for sharing your stories tonight. I want you to know that I heard you, and I believe you. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the room. For a long time, I thought I understood what it meant to be black in America. I've experienced discrimination. I've been followed in stores, pulled over for no reason, treated with suspicion, but I also had my badge. I had my authority. I thought that protected me. James paused, gathering his thoughts. 3 weeks ago, I learned that it doesn't. I learned that when some people look at me, all they see is a black man. The badge doesn't matter. The uniform doesn't. 6 weeks after the incident, Chief Anderson called a press conference. The internal affairs investigation was complete, and the department was ready to announce its findings and decisions. James sat in the front row of the crowded media room, flanked by Patricia and his lawyer David. Behind them sat community leaders, activists, and dozens of reporters with cameras and notepads. The room buzzed with anticipation. Chief Anderson stepped to the podium, his face serious. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to read a prepared statement and then I'll take a few questions. He cleared his throat and began. On the evening of September 15th, Detective James Robinson of the State Police was wrongfully detained and arrested by 2 officers from our department while he was off duty. Detective Robinson repeatedly identified himself as a law enforcement officer and requested that his credentials be verified. These requests were ignored. Room was silent except for the clicking of camera, shutters. A thorough investigation by Internal Affairs has concluded that Officers Daniels and McCarthy violated multiple department policies, including proper identification procedures, respectful treatment of citizens, and honest reporting. The investigation also revealed a pattern of complaints against both officers involving allegations of racial profiling and excessive force. James felt Patricia squeeze his hand. Based on these findings, Officers Daniels and McCarthy have been terminated from the department, effective immediately. Additionally, the department will be reviewing all previous complaints filed against these officers to determine if any cases warrant further investigation or compensation. A murmur went through the crowd. James closed his eyes for a moment, letting the words sink in. Terminated, not suspended, not reprimanded, terminated. Furthermore, Chief Anderson continued, this incident has highlighted serious gaps in our department's policies and training. Therefore, I'm announcing the following reforms effective immediately. He pulled out a second sheet of paper. First, all officers will be required to complete mandatory training on implicit bias, de-escalation techniques, and cultural competency. This training will be conducted quarterly, not just as a one-time session. Second, we are implementing a new body camera policy. All uniformed officers will be equipped with body cameras that must be activated during any citizen interaction. Failure to activate cameras will result in disciplinary action. Third, we are establishing an independent civilian review board with the power to investigate complaints of misconduct, including allegations of racial profiling. This board will have subpoena power and will report directly to the mayor's office, not to this department. James couldn't believe what he was hearing. These were real substantive changes, not just empty promises, but actual policy reforms. Fourth, the chief continued, we are creating a new Office of Community Relations and Police Accountability. This office will be headed by a senior officer with the rank of captain and will serve as a bridge between the department and the communities we serve. Anderson paused and looked directly at James. I am pleased to announce that Detective James Robinson has accepted my offer to lead this new office. Effective next month, he will be promoted to captain and will be responsible for implementing these reforms and ensuring that incidents like the one he experienced never happen again. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Patricia threw her arms around James, tears streaming down her face. James sat there stunned. Anderson had mentioned the promotion in their private meetings, but James hadn't been sure it would actually happen. Now it was real. It was public. There was no going back. After the press conference, James met with Chief Anderson in his office. You surprised me out there, James said. Anderson smiled slightly. I wanted to make a statement. This department is serious about change, and putting you in charge of making it happen sends that message loud and clear. Some people aren't going to like this, James pointed out. Some people already don't like it, Anderson agreed. I've gotten calls from the police union, from city council members, from officers who think we're overreacting. But I've also gotten calls from community leaders thanking me, from parents saying they might trust us again, from young officers who want to be part of the change. He stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city below. James, I'm not going to lie to you. This is going to be hard. You're going to face resistance from inside the department and skepticism from outside. But I believe you're the right person for this job. You've walked in both worlds. You understand what it means to serve, and you understand what it means to be treated unjustly. Use that perspective. James left the chief's office feeling the weight of what he had just accepted. He wasn't just a detective anymore. He was now the face of reform, the person responsible for transforming a department that had been doing things the same way for decades. The reaction was swift and divided. Supportive messages flooded his email and social media. Community groups praised the decision. Editorial boards called it a step in the right direction. But there was also backlash. The police union released a statement expressing concern about the reforms and questioning whether they were necessary. Some officers openly complained that James had thrown his fellow cops under the bus. Anonymous comments on police forums called him a traitor, a sellout, worse. One evening, James stayed late at his desk working on plans for the new office. His phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but he answered anyway. Detective Robinson, a young voice said. This is he. My name is Tyler. I'm a junior at Central High School. I just wanted to call and say thank you. Thank me for what? James asked, surprised. For speaking up, for not staying quiet. I'm black and I've been stopped by cops 4 times in the past year. Every time I was just walking home from school or going to the store. Every time they treated me like I had done something wrong. And every time I felt like I couldn't say anything because who would believe me? The young man's voice cracked slightly. But then I saw your story, and I realized that if it could happen to a police detective, then maybe I'm not crazy for feeling the way I do. Maybe it's not all in my head. And maybe if you can speak up, I can too. James felt his throat tighten. Tyler, thank you for calling. And you're not crazy. Your experiences are real and they matter. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. After he hung up, James sat in his empty office for a long time, thinking about that call. Thinking about all the young people like Tyler who had been made to feel like they were the problem. Thinking about the responsibility he now carried. The following Monday, James reported to his new office. It was a small space on the second floor with 2 desks, a conference table, and boxes of files waiting to be organized. His assistant, a young officer named Christine Park, was already there, setting up her computer. Good morning, Captain, she said with a smile. Ready to change the world? Let's start with changing this department, James replied. The world can wait. They spent the first week organizing, planning, and meeting with stakeholders. James met with the newly formed Civilian Review Board, with community leaders, with the mayor's office, with training coordinators. He listened more than he talked, learning what people needed, what they feared, what they hoped for. One of his first initiatives was to create a program pairing officers with community members for regular dialogue sessions. Not formal meetings, but casual conversations over coffee or lunch, where both sides could share their perspectives without judgment. He also began working with the training academy to completely overhaul the curriculum. Instead of just adding a few hours of diversity training, he wanted to fundamentally change how officers were taught to view the communities they served. "We need to stop training officers to see civilians as potential threats," he explained to the academy director. "We need to train them to see people, real people, with families and jobs and dreams, people who deserve respect and dignity regardless of what they look like." It wasn't easy. Some instructors resisted, arguing that officer safety had to come first. James didn't disagree with that, but he pushed back on the idea that safety and respect were somehow incompatible. "An officer can be both safe and respectful," he insisted. "In fact, showing respect often makes interactions safer. When people feel heard and treated fairly, they're less likely to become hostile." Meanwhile, the body camera rollout was beginning. Every patrol officer was being fitted with a camera and trained on its use. James insisted that the footage be stored independently and that the Civilian Review Board have access to it. "Transparency builds trust," he told the department in a memo. "If we have nothing to hide, then we shouldn't be afraid of cameras." Not everyone agreed. Some officers complained that the cameras would make them second-guess every decision, that they'd be afraid to do their jobs. James understood the concern but held firm. "If you're afraid the camera will catch you doing something wrong," he said at a department meeting, "then maybe you shouldn't be doing that thing in the first place." 6 months into his new role, James was invited to speak at a national conference on police reform. Standing at the podium in front of hundreds of law enforcement officials from across the country, he shared his story and the lessons he had learned. The evening sun was setting over the quiet neighborhood as Detective James Robinson pulled his car into the parking lot of a small convenience store. He had just spent the last 3 hours at his mother's house, helping her fix a leaky faucet and catching up on family matters. Now all he wanted was to grab a cold drink and head home to his own family. James was wearing simple clothes that day, a dark blue hoodie, comfortable jeans, and his favorite sneakers. Nothing fancy. He wasn't on duty, so there was no uniform, no badge visible on his chest, no gun belt around his waist. Just a regular guy stopping for a bottle of water on his way home. The store was one of those typical corner shops you see in every neighborhood. Bright fluorescent lights, aisles packed with snacks and drinks, and a tired-looking clerk behind the counter. James walked in, nodded politely at the clerk, and headed straight for the refrigerated section at the back. He grabbed a large bottle of water, checked the price, and made his way to the counter. The clerk, an older man with gray hair and kind eyes, rang up the purchase. They exchanged a few words about the weather. Nothing important, just the kind of small talk that makes life feel normal. James paid with cash, took his receipt, and tucked it into his pocket. The whole thing took maybe 2 minutes. As he pushed open the glass door and stepped back into the parking lot, James noticed something that made his stomach tighten just a bit. A police cruiser was pulling into the lot, moving slowly, deliberately. The car came to a stop near the entrance, and 2 officers stepped out. James had been a cop for 15 years. He knew that look, that body language, that careful way they scanned the area. They were looking for someone. And right now their eyes were locked on him. He told himself to stay calm. He had done nothing wrong. He was a decorated detective with the state police, for crying out loud. He had commendations, awards, letters of appreciation from the community. But none of that mattered right now because none of that was visible. All they saw was a black man in a hoodie walking through a parking lot at dusk. James continued walking toward his car, trying to act natural. He could feel their eyes following him. The bottle of water felt heavy in his hand, though it weighed almost nothing. Every step seemed to echo in the quiet evening air. Then he heard it. That voice every person of color knows too well. "Hey, you there! Stop right where you are!" James stopped. His heart was beating faster now, but he kept his face calm. He had been trained for high-pressure situations. He had talked down armed suspects, negotiated with dangerous criminals, handled riots and protests. But this was different. This was him on the other side. He turned slowly, making sure his hands were visible. The two officers were walking toward him now, and he could see their hands hovering near their weapons. The taller one, who looked to be in his early 30s, had his right hand resting on his gun holster. The other one, slightly shorter and stockier, was moving to circle around behind James. "Can I help you, officers?" James asked, keeping his voice steady and respectful. This was not the time for pride or attitude. This was survival. The tall officer spoke first. His name tag read Daniels. "We got a call about a robbery suspect in this area. Black male wearing dark clothing, about your height and build. You match that description?" James felt a familiar frustration rising in his chest, but he pushed it down. How many times had he heard this? How many black men in this city were about his height wearing dark clothing? Probably thousands. But he knew how this worked. He knew the script. "Officer, I understand, but I just came from visiting my mother. I stopped here to buy water. I have the receipt right here in my pocket. The clerk inside can confirm I was just shopping." The officer called Daniels didn't seem interested. "I need you to put your hands where I can see them. Right now." James slowly raised both hands, the water bottle still in his right hand. "My wallet is in my back pocket. I can show you my identification if you'd like." The second officer, whose tag read McCarthy, had completed his circle and was now standing behind James. "Don't move," he barked. "Keep your hands up." A woman walking to her car stopped and stared. Then another person came out of the store and paused, sensing the tension. Within seconds, a small crowd was beginning to gather. James could see phones coming out, cameras pointing in his direction. At least there would be witnesses. At least there would be video. "Officer Daniels," James said, keeping his voice calm and clear. "I'm going to tell you something important, and I need you to listen carefully. I am a police officer. I'm a detective with the state police. My badge and identification are in my wallet. If you just let me show you—" "Sure you are," Daniels interrupted with a smirk. "And I'm the police commissioner." "You think we're stupid?" McCarthy laughed from behind him. "Yeah, we hear that one all the time. Everyone's a cop when they get caught." James felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his composure. "I'm not lying to you. I'm asking you, as a fellow officer, to check my credentials before this situation gets out of hand. My name is Detective James Robinson. You can call it in right now and verify." But they weren't listening. Daniel stepped closer, his face hard and suspicious. "Turn around. Put your hands on the car now." This was really happening. After 15 years of service, after all the criminals he had caught, all the lives he had saved, all the hours spent protecting and serving this very community, he was being treated like a suspect. Like a criminal. Like his badge, his rank, his entire career meant nothing because of the color of his skin. James took a slow breath. He could fight this. He could argue, demand they verify his identity, insist on his rights. But he had seen how these situations could spiral out of control. He had seen the news stories, watched the videos, attended the funerals. He knew that one wrong move, one misinterpreted gesture, could end with him on the ground. Or worse, so he complied. He turned around, placed his hands on the hood of his car, and felt the cold metal against his palms. The water bottle rolled away across the parking lot. The crowd was growing larger now. More phones recording, more voices murmuring in confusion and concern. And all James could think was, "I'm a cop. I'm one of them. And they don't even care."